AskReddit by Meowmamix. People who liked Elon Musk but no longer do. What was the turning point? The first time I realized there's something wrong with him was when he accused one of the mine divers of being a pedophile because he was mad at him. It was all downhill from there. I was so confused by that reaction that I kept thinking there must be something else we don't know. Now I look back and realize that no, Elon Musk just has the emotional maturity of a child. That whole thing with the kids trapped in the cave in Thailand where Musk tried to insert himself as the hero. When the pro divers actually rescued the kids and nobody took Musk's mini submarine idea seriously, and then he goes and calls the leader of the rescue team a pedophile. It really revealed a lot about his character to me. He's got an ego the size of the sun, the maturity of a 12-year-old and the self-awareness of a brick. I think you nailed it. I remember being a big fan of Tesla and SpaceX, and Elon seemed a likable, intriguing guy. Some of his comments seemed a bit out there, but I chalked that up to eccentric genius who just said weird stuff from time to time. Then the kids got trapped in the cave and he took it too far. Honestly, my shift in perspective came when I noticed the pattern of him using controversy to stay relevant. Initially, his ideas and ambitions for space and clean energy were enthralling. Then it became a sequence of erratic tweets, controversial stances, and haphazard business moves that seemed more about stirring the media pot than true innovation. The Thai cave fiasco, as mentioned, was an eye-opener, but what sealed it for me was the entire fiasco with the Twitter acquisition. It's one thing to be an eccentric genius, it's another to wield influence without a compass. Remember how funny Elon thought it would be to bring a kitchen sink into Twitter HQ so they could let it sink in that he was buying the place? I was fairly neutral or indifferent, but the whole Thai cave rescue sub-saga thing was when I started to notice he was a cunt. I remember thinking one of the richest people on the planet can't possibly be that fragile, and but that just because someone said their idea to rescue those kids wouldn't work. That was only the beginning. Thai cave thing is when it started. But then it continued with each and every time he opened his stupid mouth about stuff he clearly had no idea about. He's not a futurist, he's just another reactionary who wishes he could be a 19th century robber baron. Yeah, for me I had concerns when the cave thing happened, but when he started sharing his thoughts on Covered in 2020, I realized he was a clown. No single turning point, but several things over time. For me the very first moment was when he kept insisting that our world is a simulation based on incredibly flimsy logic, and everybody was just like, oh yes, good point Mr. Musk. Like, I don't have a strong opinion on the idea, but I was sort of turned off by how he had somehow risen above scrutiny at that moment. Then came the Thai cave rescue incident. I wasn't bothered by him trying to contribute resources to help, even if nobody had asked for it. But the false accusation, calling his critic a pedo-guy and everything that followed in that story was a big issue. Then came the Cybertruck. That thing is ridiculous on a practical level, in so many ways. Then came the actions he took immediately after purchasing Twitter. A lot of really bad business decisions and really poor treatment of people. He's like if the kid from the Twilight Zone grew up and instead of making us do magic tricks for him we all have to sit and listen to his shitty stand-up routine. I liked him when he was focused on making green energy affordable. I remember when he came out with the Tesla solar roof, and I thought it was very cool. I still think it's a great idea. The turning point for me was when he became more political, when he started going down the anti-woke and conspiracy theorist path. I noticed that the type of people that were rallying around him were not the kind of people I like or even agree with. And Musk kept doubling down, to the point where he bought Twitter and lost all that money. It just became extremely obvious that he's very thin-skinned and he's the type of person that can never admit he's wrong about anything. Then, of course, he started letting his racism and anti-Semitism slip out, but I was way past my turning point by then. Same. I never really liked him, but I thought he was trying to do something good. Then he just went down a path and started picking up the worst kind of people as followers along the way. When I first started hearing about Elon Musk, it was essentially that he was the genius visionary founder of Tesla, and I thought, wow, this guy sounds pretty cool. I don't know anything about electric cars, so when he talked about it, it all sounded pretty smart. I think the Tesla wall and solar roof are really cool ideas. Then he was the genius visionary founder of SpaceX, and I thought, man, he sounds like a modern day Thomas Edison. I don't know much about spaceflight, so when he talked about it, it all sounded pretty smart. Then he bought Twitter. I do know a bit about software development, so when he talked about re-implementing the entire tech stack and disabling microservices to save money, I realized that he had no fucking idea what he was talking about. Charging a fee so that anyone can get a verified checkmark shows a fundamental misunderstanding about the platform. Then he just kept talking and talking, and my impression of him continued to drop. Then I found out that he didn't actually found Tesla and doesn't even have a STEM background. He still won't shut up. COVID, the cave rescue thing, the woke stuff, Ukraine. I used to read about him from afar, browsing headlines and reading stories about how he's the next great inventor. That he's like a modern Nikola Tesla or something. Thought he was cool and looked forward to hearing more. As more and more came out, it's clear he's just a fraud and is loaded rich. Rich guy with great PR for a few years. No one moment flipped his script for me. He just isn't what he or anyone else claimed. Just a money whale throwing cash at renewable energy because that's the future of the world. It's all done though. He's just your usual run-of-the-mill flawed human. Not the visionary social media would have led you to believe. Ironically, he is much more of a Thomas Edison. When he fired his secretary who's been loyal to him for years after she asked for a raise. Let's not forget illegally firing employees for trying to form a union and doubling down by illegally threatening employees will lose stick options and trading if they unionized. He said that on Twitter, not even in private. The guy openly and proudly violated labor laws. 2019 is the earliest I can find of that happening, but I'm sure it started the moment he was the boss. I was neutral on him until then, when I realized he's your standard entitled billionaire asshole that's the human embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The moment he started talking about Ukraine having to submit to Russia and be done with it. Then JT was further amplified by him randomly shutting down Starlink to sabotage Ukrainian military operations out of pettiness. See also, Elon Musk draws rebuke by suggesting Taiwan accept rule by China. https://www.cbsnews.com/Elon-Musk-Taiwan-China-Ukraine-Russia/ My breakpoint was Musk making excuses for Putin in Ukraine. I would be absolutely shocked and Putin didn't have a treasure trove of dirt on Musk. The dude is reckless and an attention whore. I'm sure Putin and his spies have uncovered things that Musk doesn't want public. The cave situation was the first moment I thought he was misguided, but it wasn't until he started aligning with Trump and other authoritarians that he lost my good faith. If your goal is making humanity a multiplanetary species, the cost of Twitter would have bought a lot of spaceship development. The whole timeline of Mars colonization back in the early 2010s was obviously bullshit and was there just to keep fairly dumb science and technology journalists interested while SpaceX rockets were continually exploding. Also conflates base and colony. COVID. Him saying COVID was trending downwards and would be over by April made me think this guy is worryingly dumb for someone with a platform. I read his authorized biography about a decade ago. Dude is a complete tool who sees people as a resource for his consumption. I always liked the Terry Pratchett quote, from his character Granny Weatherwax, that the root of evil is treating people as things. I'm not sure he'd fit everyone's definition of evil, but he definitely treats people as things. The man's a poster child for main character syndrome. Stuff such as him saying he'll donate $6 billion to fight world hunger if the charity actually laid out a comprehensive plan to make it work. They did, and then he snuck away, never to mention it again. Weird bloke. Stands for nothing other than his next 100 million. I feel bad for whoever at WFP had to sit down and say, okay, suppose we could write the report good enough to get 1% or more of that money. How much effort should we put into a custom response to this guy? I was indifferent toward him. I respected him for being intelligent and thought Tesla's and the work he was doing with SpaceX was cool. Once he started showing the world his personality is when I realized he was just another immature rich arsehole and grifter. It should have been obvious after the Thai cave thing, but I didn't follow that story all that closely. The very first time I personally started to have questions was when he proposed an underground hyperloop for RT1 in Delaware. Most people have probably forgotten that, but I'm from Delaware and have driven on RT1 many times over my entire life, so it caught our attention here. RT1 gets a crazy traffic in the summer when people are trying to get from points north to the beach resort towns, but is otherwise a pretty empty stretch of highway connecting not much to not much. Delaware is also basically a sandbar and you only have to dig about 2 feet to hit water. That's an exaggeration in some parts, but not by a lot. You don't even want your house to have a basement, much less a tunnel running the length of the entire state. So my first reaction was, wow, that would be awesome on. When he started talking. This lol. I viewed the guy as a real life Tony Stark until he started talking more. It's a classic case of it is better to keep silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubts. Not that I think he's a fool, I think he is smart. But he opened his mouth and removed all doubt for me that he's an asshole, and just another shrewd businessman, but with businesses more intriguing to younger generations. Dogecoin pump and dump SNL sketch. Dude fucked over thousands of people. The Twitter acquisition. It completely blew up the notion I had of him that he was a great businessman, and after I started seeing him in a different light I realized that he is just a vaporware salesman. He makes bold promises that he never delivers on, and with his turn towards MAGA views in the last few years has really made me hold him in contempt at this point. I liked him when he was pushing hard for electric vehicles and being a mad scientist making flamethrowers and stuff. My turning point was when he became active on Twitter and I saw what his personality was like, lol. Just a sad man who desperately wants people to love him and think he's funny. I prefer my evil billionaires to not care if I live or die, like Bezos or Zuck. It's kind of funny how Zuck and Bezos are more palatable than Elon, but they really are. 2 things. 1. When he called the cave rescuer a pedophile and doubled down on it, after lying about sending a rescue mini-sub. 2. During the height of COVID, he claimed he was retrofitting his production and said he sent 1,000 ventilators to desperate hospitals. He actually sent a few useless and cheap outsourced CPAP machines for sleep apnea. He never did send a single ventilator. I was a huge Elon fanboy. I'd literally rage about how Net and WSJ would run baseless hit pieces on Tesla to protect their relationships with traditional auto manufacturers. I also could not wait to buy a Tesla someday. When he started going anti-woke during COVID, I went from fanboy to neutral when he started defending Russia and saying Ukraine should surrender to preserve the global economy. I was absolutely done. Elon, just like pretty much every other insanely rich person in the US, is purely motivated by greed and has zero morals. That's very apparent and why I now despise him.